Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going completely under the hood of your nervous system for a true masterclass on the deepest biological mechanisms of relaxation. We are going to reconstruct the state of calm from the microscopic cellular level all the way up to systemic longevity. By the end of this, you'll understand the hidden biological levers that actually govern your sleep architecture, your stress resilience, and your cardiovascular health. We so often mistake relaxation for just passively collapsing on the couch at the end of the day, maybe endlessly scrolling on a screen. But biologically speaking, true relaxation is absolutely not an absence of doing. It's a highly calibrated, active neuromechanical reflex. It's a state characterized by measurable, intentional shifts in your neuromuscular system. So, to find ultimate calm and really optimize our sleep architecture, we have to confront a pretty fascinating biological paradox. And that paradox is this. Sometimes extreme voluntary physical tension is actually the most direct path to total cellular release. But what is literally happening inside ourselves when we force our bodies to just let go? Let's zoom in and take a look at Act I, the neuromuscular battleground. Deep inside your skeletal muscles, there's basically an evolutionary tug-of-war going on. You've got two primary proprioceptors constantly competing for control. On one side, you have muscle spindles. Think of these as your emergency brakes. They sense rapid stretch, and they trigger an instant contraction so you don't tear a muscle. But at the very ends of your muscles, right where they meet the tendons, you have the Golgi tendon organs, or GTOs for short. Now, these guys sense extreme tension. To stop you from literally ripping your own tendon right off the bone under immense stress, your GTOs trigger a reflex that forces the muscle to immediately relax. That life-saving built-in mechanism is called autogenic inhibition. And here is where it gets really interesting. When you intentionally squeeze a muscle as hard as you can, using a technique known as progressive muscle relaxation, you aren't just doing a workout, you are actively hijacking this reflex. You're maxing out the tension to force a biological override, giving that muscle absolutely no choice but to let go. An incredible split-second chemical cascade actually occurs to make this happen. When you apply that high tension, the GTO depolarizes. It fires an electrical signal down a super fast sensory fiber straight into your spinal cord. Right there, a spinal interneuron releases glycine, which is a powerful inhibitory neurotransmitter. That glycine hyperpolarizes the motor neuron, essentially pulling the plug on the electrical current. In a fraction of a second, your muscle is forced into a state of complete involuntary relaxation.
Which brings us perfectly into Act II, the autonomic cascade.
So we know how the local muscle relaxes, but that physical release doesn't just stay local. It actually sends a massive surge of ascending feedback straight up your spinal cord and right into your central nervous system. This somatic feedback literally slams the brakes on your sympathetic nervous system, that's your fight or flight survival drive, and it forcefully redirects your entire biology into parasympathetic mode. That is your state of deep rest, digestion, and systemic recovery. Now, when you practice progressive muscle relaxation, you're typically holding a contraction for about 5 to 10 seconds, releasing it and taking a long, deep breath. By synchronizing this rhythm with slow breathing at about 6 breaths per minute, you hit something amazing, the body's natural resonance frequency. You maximize what's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, effectively locking your breath and your cardiovascular baroreflex into perfect biological synchronization. This conscious mechanical pathway descends right from your prefrontal cortex down to your brainstem, unleashing what we call the vagal brake. Your mighty vagus nerve stimulates the release of acetylcholine directly onto the pacemaker of your heart. Instantly, your cardiac rhythm slows down, and your resting heart rate variability, or HRV, can spike by 4 to 10 times. And biologically speaking, a high HRV is the ultimate signature of a robust, deeply stress-resilient human being. Let's look at the actual clinical data in Act III, Systemic Impact and the Cortisol Paradox. The cardiovascular impact of this autonomic shift is just staggering. Look at this data on young adults with prehypertension. Just 20 minutes of this daily muscle tension and release acts as a powerful vasodilator. In merely 2 weeks, it dropped average resting systolic blood pressure from nearly 131 down to 117. You are literally leveraging your own mechanical biology to physically widen your blood vessels. And it doesn't stop at blood pressure. This profoundly alters our nightly recovery. A massive meta-analysis of 14 randomized controlled trials revealed a Hedges G effect size of -1.24. For those who know their stats, that is a huge shift, proving this technique drastically improves subjective sleep quality. By manually shutting down sympathetic nerve activity, you are bleeding off built-up sleep pressure, which is exactly what allows your brain to finally drop into deep, restorative sleep architecture. Now, with such profound drops in blood pressure and massive improvements in sleep, it is super tempting to view this as a magical cure-all for stress. But as we dig deeper into the scientific literature, a really crucial question emerges. Does this mechanical relaxation actually stop the body's central engine from producing stress hormones in the first place? Well, this brings us to a fascinating biological contradiction known as the cortisol paradox. While progressive muscle relaxation unequivocally eliminates the physical symptoms of anxiety, we're talking about the racing heart, the tight shoulders, the shallow breathing, the evidence is actually quite mixed on its ability to directly lower central cortisol levels. It beautifully treats the physical manifestation of stress in the peripheral nervous system, but it may not rapidly shut down the central HPA axis in the brain, which is what produces the cortisol hormone to begin with. So if active tension doesn't work perfectly for everyone's internal stress response, let's explore Act 4, modalities of calm, PMR versus autogenic training. What happens if we remove the mechanical, muscular effort entirely? Enter autogenic training, or AT. Developed back in the 1930s by J.H. Schultz, this is a form of clinical self-hypnosis. Instead of any physical squeezing, it relies purely on passive concentration. You are allowing hypnotic suggestions of warmth and heaviness to just wash over the body to shift the nervous system. When you put them head-to-head, the contrast between the two modalities is really striking. PMR requires a stance of active, attentive effort, targeting the somatic muscular system directly. Autogenic training, on the other hand, targets the autonomic nervous system indirectly through visualization. It requires a deeply passive stance of simply letting go. And there was a landmark study in the year 2000 that compared these exact modalities in 120 psychiatric patients. Researchers actually measured the electrical tension in their forehead muscles. Surprisingly enough, autogenic training was significantly superior to progressive muscle relaxation at reducing this frontalis muscle electrical activity in highly anxious patients. So why on earth would simply visualizing warmth beat actively forcing a muscle to relax? Well, it turns out that for highly neurotic or anxious individuals, the active mechanical effort of squeezing muscles can paradoxically trigger performance anxiety. They sit there worrying, am I squeezing hard enough? Am I doing this right? For these folks, the completely passive nature of autogenic training bypasses that psychological friction entirely, making it a far more user-friendly tool. But regardless of which method you choose, mastering this autonomic switch has profound clinical utility across the board. We're talking about allowing women to conserve energy during childbirth and lowering vascular resistance in preeclampsia. Post-surgery, it physically alters the brain's neurological perception of pain, reducing the threat signal. And for elite athletes, it acts as an incredible energy preservation system, optimizing blood flow right before they step out to compete. Which leaves us with our final takeaways in the blueprint for optimization. Ultimately, the science shows us that true relaxation is not an accident. It is a highly conscious biological skill. Whether you lean toward the active tension of PMR or the passive warmth of autogenic training, you are actively engaging neuroplasticity. With practice, you are physically rewiring your neural pathways to build a stronger vagal brake. You are giving yourself the absolute power to shift your biology out of hyperarousal and into deep cellular recovery on demand. The biological machinery of calm, from your Golgi tendon organs to your vagus nerve, is already built into your cells. The pathways exist. So the only question is, tonight, when the weight of the day presses down on you, will you just let stress passively dictate your biology, or will you consciously pull the lever? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.